the idea was if I can deconstruct music and isolate individual components, maybe I can give that power back to the user to decide how they want to listen to a specific song.
This episode of Ken's Nearest Neighbors is brought to you by Z by HP, HP's high compute, workstation grade line of products and solutions. Special thanks to Allie Miller for introducing me to this guest. I met Ale Koretzky soon after I moved to Hawaii, and we became fast friends. I was hooked on the stories that he told me each time we met. From traveling to the US from Argentina to pursue his fascination with signal processing, to landing his band's music video on MTV in Latin America, the passion that he has for music and machine learning bled into every conversation that we had. I love how Ale can go from laid back and relaxed to intense and passionate instantaneously when he gets excited about an idea. Currently, Ale is the head of machine learning and audio science at Splice, where he's a thought leader at the intersection of machine learning, signal processing, and sound. A few things he knows quite a lot about. In this interview, we learn about Ale's experience learning the signal processing field, his music career, and the main reason why some machine learning projects fail. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hey, I'm very excited. I have my good friend Ale Koretzky. He has moved to Hawaii pretty recently, and we've spent quite a good amount of time together. We might have come up with some fairly maniacal data science ideas and conversations, and I'm really happy to have you on the podcast today because your background is in a field that I have literally no exposure to, and that's kind of the signal processing, the sound side of data science and machine learning. And I'm really happy that you can share your story and the things that you've learned about this space with all of the community here. I also think you're a very interesting guy in general, so we're gonna have a lot of color, we're gonna have a lot of fun in this conversation.
All right, likewise, and thanks for having me. And shout out to Allie Miller who introduced us.
Yeah.
And, now we became friends here in Hawaii, so
Very special shout out to her, and if you're not already, definitely follow her on LinkedIn. She is a incredible, I guess we'd say a mega influencer in the data science, machine learning, and AI space. So huge thanks to her for putting us in contact, and look what it's come to.
Yeah, that's right.
Awesome, Ale. So the first thing I usually like to ask, I don't ask the boring questions of tell us who you are. I like to start with a specific moment or a little bit of a story about where you first got interested in data or you first got interested in technology in general. That to me is always something that I like to understand better. Is it a single pivotal moment that snapped for you and it's like, wow, I love this? Or was it a more of a slow progression that really snowballed into this profession and into this interest you have in the field in general?
Sure. I think it's both. There were a couple of catalysts, but it's always, it's been an evolving thing. But going back in time, back in Cordoba, Argentina, I was 8 years old, and my mom sent me to learn computers to this new school around the neighborhood. I had never seen or touched a computer in my life, and that day I remember it as if it was yesterday. And back in the day, they were using the logo educational programming, the little turtle. I don't know if you ever used that. And I remember that day. I drew some stairs and a house, and it was mind blowing. I felt so empowered, and that was a moment for sure. But from then on, it became like a push between pursuing something in technology or architecture. I actually, for a very long time, thought I would become an architect. I love design, and it was, it went for a while where I would go one direction or another. I'm a very curious guy in general. But these two things, in a way, converged very nicely, and it kind of like led the path to data. Because when my family was finally able to afford a computer, what I gravitated towards right away is design. So I started learning by myself some graphic design, and I started like drawing buildings and stuff. Corel Draw, I don't know if you back in the day. Eventually, that led to my first company. Was a web and graphic design company that I ran for like 5 years. But as I started getting into design, and coming across things like color theory, stuff like that. And even at school, one of the things that I was very interested in was chemistry. Little by little, I started developing this intuition in the back of my head that reality, as we know it and as we perceive it, actually lives in a much less complex space. There was a latent space of data back then. Obviously I didn't use that term, but that was an intuition that started really planting that seed in the back of my head that eventually led me into a career in data. So from then on, eventually I decided a degree in engineering, and I studied telecommunications engineering back in Argentina. And no surprise, one of the two of the most interesting topics that I found over those 5 years were statistics and signal processing. And if you look at these two disciplines, more holistically, in a way, statistics is about finding, a model for reality, a model for data, and try to express reality in a very compact way through data distributions. And signal processing, in a way, is exploiting that knowledge about the distribution of your data to transform, manipulate, and use your data in a way that's suitable for specific applications. In the case of telecommunications, is about how can you transform, manipulate the data so that it's easier to send over a transmission channel, for example, or compression. How do you make your signal smaller so that you can take advantage of the bandwidth that you have for transmission? So, and in the context of signal processing, that's the first time that I came across this amazing thing called the Fourier transform, and that blew my mind because not only is it an incredibly powerful discovery that pretty much enabled the modern world as we see it, but also it touched back into this notion of everything. Reality is made of very small set of building blocks. In the context of the Fourier transform, that any signal can be expressed as a linear combination of complex exponential bases. And I knew at that time, around my third year into my career, my degree, that's what I wanted to pursue. It was something related to signals and unlocking or revealing the true space where that data lives.
Interesting. Well, I think we get so wrapped up in the data that we can understand as humans, like that's interpretable to us, that we forget that there's so much data out there that's either, like there's a lot of data that's only interpretable to animals, right? Like that's only in their audio spectrum or in someone else's different visual spectrum. There's so much hidden data that we're not encoding that to me, there's like, if you're really thinking about how there's so many signals out there, everything is made up of these different building blocks. If we look at that through the lens of data science or machine learning, there's endless possibilities of what we can understand or hope to understand. And the processing part is what makes it interpretable to humans as well, is that there are all these things out there that we can't understand, and now we have algorithms, now we use machine learning to make it comprehensible to us. And I just love that broader theory, if we're applying it to like life or something, is that there's all this stuff that we don't understand, but we create these mechanisms, there are these systems that we use to make, I don't know, like happiness explicable to ourselves, or to comprehend even our own body rhythms that we wouldn't understand before. So I love that whole process. I will say there's a small tangent there related to the architecture, is that I would never wanted to dive too deep into architecture, but my dad was very seriously looking into becoming an architecture. He studied engineering in school. He went down that road for a while, and then he eventually just like was like, nope, I'm gonna become a doctor. And so I feel like everyone goes down that path because architecture and building things, I think that's an like an innate human desire is to construct, right? And the lowest hanging fruit is always going to be a building or a house. It's the most like quickly quick logical connection that we make.
Yeah,
But
making your thoughts tangible in
exactly.
a way.
And to a certain extent, though, I think we do something very similar in data science. Is that we're conceptualizing a model and we literally build it using code. I mean, we're not building anything too pretty looking, uh, but it's so nice how it lined up for you to go from architecture, graphic design, to now building models and understanding these underlying um, principles and building blocks. So I just love that arc in your individual story.
And I think it also touches on, I'm a very, introspective person. I think it touches on more philosophical aspects of, you know, reality, right?
Yeah.
Like starting from even, going to DNA or everything under the hood. Uh, there's a real engineering under the hood of things. So to me, every time I work on a data problem, in addition to wanting to solve a specific business problem or building a new product, it brings me back over and over to this notion, right? It's a way to really connect with life, in my case, by revealing and unlocking that space that's not easily accessible on a day-to-day.
Well, one of my favorite, I wouldn't say it's one of my favorite books, but one of my favorite concepts is that of the, it's from the book The Blind Watchmaker, and it's this idea of intelligent design where humans, right? We are essentially the most complex things, like our brains, how our body functions, like how it even works, that are even possible, like period, that we're familiar with. I mean, maybe there's something that we don't understand in the universe way out there, but intelligent design and these types of things, they come from iteration, they come from exploration, they come from time, and I'm not too sure where I'm going with this, but the idea of that all of these components have come about through some sort of intelligent process, and that process being evolution, to me is always fascinating. Is that, hey, can we hack this? Can we look into this? Can we understand it better? And all the problems that we have, or that we really seek to understand, they also kind of come from that process as well. And we're trying to encode DNA. We're trying to understand this, and it's one very big cyclical problem that I think everyone who's in this field is always trying to better understand as well.
Yeah, that's right.
So I get your background. I see that you had that really interesting moment growing up, and it all seems to flow really well together. I'd love to hear about your experience, one, learning more about these skills, maybe post-education, and your career track through this field, and how you ended up where you are today at Splice.
Sure. So, towards the end of my studies, still back in Argentina, I knew by then I had to work on I needed to get my hands onto something that's related to data or signals. And signal at the end of the day is still data, right? And where a lot of my friends went the path of, let's all go to this software company that was there at the time. I chose a different path, and I somehow ended up becoming the first data science hire at the biggest credit card company in Argentina. It's called Tarjeta Naranja, which means orange card. I was like 22 at the time. And at the time, no one used the term data science or data scientist, but that was a gig. And in a nutshell, the job was they had call centers around the country, like 5 or 10, I don't remember. And they had a huge problem. They couldn't predict the call, how many calls they would receive on a given day, right? So they had huge problems with staffing and spending money very inefficiently. So the idea was, let's bring someone that can predict call center traffic nationwide at the monthly, daily, and 30-minute intervals. By predicting traffic at the monthly, daily, and half-hour intervals, you can create staffing programs to have a number of agents at any given time to handle that traffic, right? It's a super interesting problem at the intersection of traffic prediction, time series analysis, and inferential statistics. merged with queuing theory and methods, Erlang models. You have some traffic arriving and a number of servers. Um, that is a very nonlinear system, and there's a whole area of research focused on that. So that was my first job, and it was super interesting. And I think not only I was able to deliver on a working solution that worked really well, but I think I was very fortunate to early on realize what are the biggest challenges when working with in data science. And I think I can start with the data that you wish you had is not there. It's either missing or corrupted, or it's just not there. You always work with data that's not perfect. The second one is a value of learning how to ask questions and how to ask the right questions. Starting with, I don't have all this data. I need to go to someone and ask for and try to fill in the blanks somehow. But not only that, in this specific job, for instance, a marketing campaign trying to push a given product will affect traffic enormously, right? And it makes sense. So I had to talk to marketing departments to get a better idea of how this happened in the past, and try to anticipate certain things. So it was a blend of just pure data analysis, but also trying to account for things for which we didn't have history, right? And the third one, which is related to the second one, even after you've asked all the questions, you will not get all the answers. So in order to do your job and be actionable, you need to become comfortable with ambiguity, and you need to become comfortable making decisions under high uncertainty. So those three things, I experienced them firsthand in my very first job experience. I was just 22 at the time, and that became an invaluable thing because, and we're going to touch on that later, but decision making at the end of the day is the most powerful skill that I think anyone can develop if they want to work in data science or applied machine learning.
Yeah. Well, I want to double down on the comfort with ambiguity thing. That's something I think is really difficult to teach, and that's probably the thing that I see new data science candidates, people learning the field, struggling with the most. I get a lot of questions just from the content that I produce, and it's a lot like, what exactly should I do to get from point A to point B? And in this field, a lot of the times you're working on something that no one's really worked on before. It's not necessarily you're using new models, but the data you're using or the use case you're applying this information to is different than what most people have done. And so you're going to have to be the one who's combining a bunch of disparate sources of information and making it cohesive. No one's going to be able to really tell you exactly what you should do.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times, even if there are people in your organization, for example, that might know how, they're probably pretty busy working on their own problems, and they won't have time to sit and work through it with you. So the most powerful skill in my mind in this field is being able to figure out stuff on your own, being able to understand, hey, these three things are kind of similar. How are they related? If I can use this one, maybe I can also use this one in a similar way, and creating those connections, that kind of network in your mind. Because I think that so many people are used to school where it's like, hey, there's this right answer, there's this wrong answer, there's this very clear process that you have to go through. And for better or for worse, this field does not work like that.
It doesn't work.
And that's one thing we're always talking about, and we've talked offline about how important personal projects are, how important it is to go out and chase a question that you're interested in, because that is one of the ways that you can flex that skill of, hey, there's this problem that only I'm working on, or I'm working with some friends on. How do I get to that solution? How do I bootstrap it together? How do I kind of hustle and maybe even have this sort of entrepreneurial mindset to get to this place? Because I can't go about it. There isn't necessarily a convention to solve this problem, so I'm gonna have to make it up. And at least for me, that's the funnest part of this whole stuff.
Totally. And I mean, even just dealing with data, like data sets, the amount of decision making that goes into getting the data that you need is huge. And I see a lot of you know people that are trying to get into data science and going into Kaggle competitions, and that's totally fine. But in addition to that, you should, like you said, pick one idea that you're interested in and go end to end, starting with figuring out how the hell you're gonna get the data that you need to solve the problem. And because sometimes that is the first blocker, and if you are not comfortable making the decisions to get you there, you're gonna just block yourself over and over.
I think everyone who's in this field or wants to break into this field should do at least one end-to-end project, because frankly, most data scientists, they're not working across the whole pipeline. But they're going to have to at least work with someone who's doing the data cleaning, the collection on that front. And to be able to make a reasonable pass off between one person and another, to understand the constraints, the requirements, that to make the whole system work, if you don't have knowledge of what that process is like at all, it's going to be really hard to, one, find a job, but two, to be really effective at your job if you're just pigeonholed into this one thing. I mean, there's this idea of, we kind of blend the skills a little bit so that I can pick up a little bit on one end, and it's not just this clean drop off. I can go a little bit further into another domain if I need to, because frankly that happens so frequently in the workforce.
It does. Yeah, so back to what I was talking about, like those were the those core set of principles from my first job. I even later on I worked on things that were not necessarily related to data science, but those lessons learned were applicable everywhere, and I think that's that was very important for me to early on learn, because after that experience at this credit card company, I moved on to software engineering. I got a position at Motorola Solutions back in Argentina as well, and I became part of the public safety department, writing software for actually U.S. police and fire departments. It was C, C++, writing straight on top of TCP, UDP protocols, very low level, a lot of fun. I learned a lot. But again, those lessons came over and over, and that's how I naturally became a lead in the team, to try to unblock everyone, ask the right questions, and be very actionable to do our job. And yeah, I spent a couple of years there, and eventually I'm also an entrepreneur, so the entrepreneurial thing started.
The bug.
Yeah, the bug. And I actually went to a startup weekend competition back in my city, and got the first place with formed a team and came out in the first place. And that became my second startup, called tuquejasuma.com in Spanish. That means your complaint counts. That's kind of like the translation. And the company is still operating very successfully back in Argentina, and is a platform that connects people with the companies when there's something that is not working. So customer service in Argentina is not as good as in the U.S., so which requires having third-party channels for people to really be heard. And there I was a co-founder, and I drove the technology, but I also became like head of product, really try to drive the pursuit for product market fit. And it was also a way to go back to some design stuff and kind of like outline the core functionality and the core mechanics and even some of the visuals. And that was 2012. But eventually, and I remained involved with the company for the next couple of years, but eventually I really wanted to go back to this passion of signals and data, and something in between that I didn't mention. In 2006, I got a first scholarship to the U.S. I went to the University of Richmond and studied computer science for a semester. And that started connecting the dots farther as to implementation, computer science, and algorithm design, with my desire to explore signals and data. So I started looking outside of Argentina, and I probably looked into literally 30 or 40 universities around the world. Um, I lived in Israel as well, and I almost moved there. And finally, dots connected after a year of doing a lot of research, and I got a Fulbright scholarship for Argentina to come to the U.S. And at the same time, I got accepted into USC to pursue a master's degree at Viterbi, the School of Engineering. And that really was the last piece to solidify this path, and it was one of the best times in my life, those 2 years at USC. And that's what I really doubled down on. I chose a track of electrical engineering focused on signal processing, and that's what I finally solidified some of the things that I wanted to become strong at. And yeah, and from then on, there was a second chapter of my life in the U.S. that I can expand further.
This episode of Ken's Nearest Neighbors is brought to you by Z by HP. HP's high compute, workstation grade line of products and solutions. Z is specifically made for high performance data science solutions, and I personally use the ZBook Studio and the Z4 workstation. I really love that the Z line can come standard with Linux, and they also can be configured with the data science software stack. With the software stack, you can get right into the work of doing data science on day one without the overhead of having to completely reconfigure your new machine. Now back to our show. That's awesome. Well, I'm interested a bit more in just, your process for knowing that you wanted to go back to school at a certain point. To me, that's always a pretty big decision that people have to make, and it's something that I always recommend making with a lot of consideration. Obviously, you mentioned scholarship, which is a pretty compelling reason to go somewhere. But was it that you felt, hey, I want to go to one of these institutions because they're at the cutting edge of this field and that's what I want to learn? Is it that I feel like I'm limited in what I can learn on my own devices? I mean, this was a different time. It's not like there's a
World's changing very fast.
Yeah. I mean, now there's an online course for everything, but maybe just a little bit more on how that process was for you, like identifying schools with the programs and making that choice to start with.
Sure. I think it was a number of reasons. The fact that I had a first experience in the U.S. years before, while I was still in my undergrad, showed me a completely different reality in terms of educational system. And back then, when I went back to Argentina, I knew in my mind, oh, I want to do this again, and I want to do it properly, which is like get a full degree. So I thought it was a matter of time, but it was not the only reason. The second was I really wanted to solidify some of these concepts that I had only seen in school, some of them, but I didn't get the chance to really apply them in the industry after graduating. Simply because there's, back in Cordoba, Argentina, the options were a lot more limited, and I couldn't find great places where to explore, this world of signals and data, right? So I really wanted to go back and learn and have the time to really learn and explore and do some research. I always say I don't think I ever got a PhD or will ever get one because I'm very anxious about building something. I'm an engineer at heart, but I love science. I love the process of discovery and generating hypotheses and validating them. So I really wanted to go back to school. And the third one, which is not a minor one, coming to the U.S. is not that easy, right?
Yeah.
So, a lot of people reach out to me, oh, I want to go to the U.S., I want to get a job there. It's hard. It's really hard. So going to school as a stepping stone is probably one of the most, and I want to say it's easy, it's still very hard, but it's a pretty good way to come here and kind of like soft land and build a foundation, especially because it makes a difference when you have a degree from the U.S. and especially in these fields. It creates a lot of opportunity. Not to mention, USC, Viterbi has one of the best programs in the country. It's really like world class when it comes to signal processing and data, and it really made a big difference.
Yeah, and I think the idea of going to school in the U.S. is also pretty important because there's other factors at play. Just like you mentioned, there's the time that you have. So you're studying, but you can also spend a significant amount of time interviewing, trying to land internships, those types of things. Uh, Obviously, that is harder for international students, but it is definitely possible. And then, you also have the assimilation to the culture. I think that there's a big learning curve associated to that, especially depending on what countries you're coming from. And it's sad, but a lot of companies do take that into consideration as part of the interviewing and hiring process. So, just as much as you're learning the material from school, for better or for worse, it's pretty important to also learn the culture, learn not necessarily the social culture, but the work culture as well. And that can be something that's pretty compelling and even differentiate you from other candidates, which, um, I still don't know if that's necessarily a good or a bad thing, but it is something, it's a reality of
No, I
the
think
landscape.
no, and I think it's a natural thing, right? There's different cultures, different places, and uh, there's certain things that are natural to a place and not as natural to other places. So definitely, I totally agree. And uh, coming from Latin America, that there's a lot of things in common, but a lot of things are very different. And yeah, having that sort of like soft landing of having a couple of years to not only learn but experience the culture, experience how people communicate, definitely very valuable. I think over the years I've been here for almost 8 years. I think I've become more diplomatic.
You're
I'm
blue-blooded
not I'm not there
American now.
yet, but um, definitely, and like you say, it's very important because you're gonna go get a job somewhere. You need to know how to communicate with people, and certain things that, back in Argentina, at certain companies we would communicate a certain way or make jokes about certain things. Here it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And on top of that, times are changing a lot everywhere. So definitely having that awareness about where you're operating, what are the values, is very important.
Awesome. So let's move on to a little bit after you graduated school again. You started working in the U.S. now, correct? I'd love to hear about that journey to present.
Sure. So I think into my second year at USC, I the entrepreneurial bug came back, and I wanted to build something. And yeah, I still remember I was like at the library. I was like 4 in the morning or something, and I came across some work from Karma at Stanford, which is a center dealing with the intersection of audio and music and all that. I eventually started, went there and presented some of my work, but I kind of became really interested in this problem of source separation, audio source separation, which means to take a piece of audio, it could be a song or anything, and try to identify the underlying components and try to isolate them.
I'm gonna have to do that with these two microphones.
Okay,
So.
I can help you with that. It's a very, very hard problem. Uh, you know, it works under certain constraints, but I became really, really interested in solving that problem. So I really seized the opportunity of that master's, and I said I want to do research. So I reached out to one of my professors, and I said I want a research track. Even though I was not a PhD, I was admitted into one of the labs that is usually reserved for PhD students, and really started to explore that problem, and made some good progress. And eventually, I was like, I can build a product around this. So then I took advantage of the last semester at USC when I was part of the digital signal processing lab, and I decided to build a prototype. And that became TuneSplit, which was my third venture. And the reasoning behind was music is such a powerful medium, and yet music has remained passive. The act of consuming music is a very passive, unidirectional thing. You have creators that create the music, they ship it in the stereo format, and as a listener, all you can do is listen. And yet the experience is so powerful. So what if you could start empowering the listener more by having some creative power over what they listen to. So that's where it came from, and the idea was if I can deconstruct music and isolate individual components, maybe I can give that power back to the user to decide how they want to listen to a specific song. Oh, maybe I don't want to. I want to remove the drums, or I want to hear the instrumental and get rid of the vocals, all that. So I came up with this concept of semantic equalization, because at the same time I'm a fan of mechanics and product experience. So I knew it had to be very simple, and eventually I built something that it was worked pretty much like an equalizer, but instead of controlling frequencies, you control content. So you could mute the drums, you could mute the vocals and all that. So from there, I got into an incubation program with USC and developed a proof of concept and started getting serious about it and getting meetings with the record labels, UMG, and all that, trying to push this forward. Long story short, I think I was a little ahead of the time because, in a nutshell, the record labels were, "We're gonna go after you if you do this," right? Very protective on that, and for a number of reasons, I still didn't have a solid status here in the U.S. visa-wise. So I ran that for a couple of years. Eventually, I was able to sell it to a virtual reality company where I continued the work on this problem of source separation. And and more recently, a couple of years ago, I wrote a couple of Medium articles fully disclosing that technology, and that became very popular and drew a lot of attention. Um, and the idea was for people to, get familiar with manipulating audio signals, and particularly with this problem. Things are moving so fast that the technology that I developed, that was 5-6 years ago, now everything is, you have open source solutions that work a lot better by Facebook and so on. So, but that was the chapter right after school, and eventually this notion that I was pursuing of, empowering the end user with the ability to manipulate audio and make them feel like creators. Um, that that work that I was doing came to the attention of the founders of Splice, and we started a conversation, and the visions were very aligned. Eventually, the goal is to empower users and allow everyone to become part of the music creation process. In my case, I was trying to solve it through technology, very hard. Splice decided to go a different route, which was, let's try to change the model. And they ended up pursuing this royalty-free samples model, and did an incredible job in convincing the industry that that is fine to sample audio, and for even big artists to use content that's accessible to everyone. So it took a few months of conversation with the founders, and eventually I decided to join because not only I would have the opportunity to work on super interesting problems at a technical level at the intersection of audio and machine learning, but the vision for what they wanted to create and what Splice is creating was very in line with something that I can relate to also, because I'm also a musician, and I know you want to talk about that a little bit. And and for the past 3.5 years, I've been leading machine learning at Splice and audio science.
That's I really love that story because it touches on something that I'm so passionate about, and that's combining your interests together. So work interests, but also your personal interests. And whether you intended to or not, your interest in music, it had to have had some impact in the type of projects you're working on, your research, and all these things. And you're able to build something that inevitably became something greater, and it inevitably led into your current role. And it all stems from the technical abilities you've built, but the application of those things to a problem that essentially you had, right? Is that, hey, I want to get more out of my listening experience.
Yeah.
How do I do that? Can I make adjustments? Can I? And you like wrote it all the way, and I just love that idea, that concept, and I'm just happy that you could be another case study for when that pays off, and I think we both agree it paid off.
Oh, sure, it definitely helped. Um, at the same time, I think 95% of the people that work at Splice are also musicians. So
Really?
that, yeah, and that's amazing. It's really amazing. I think in my case, um, so a little bit about my music journey. I think around when I was 20 years old, I got into music, and yeah, became I started singing, and actually even at USC I was part of the Thornton School of Music. I was part of the choir. So I'm a singer, recording artist, and I had a band back in Argentina called Symmetria, and we had some fun there. We recorded a couple of studio albums. There's an MTV story that I'm going to tell you later. Um, but then, um, yeah, when it came to Splice, the truth is I never intended to blend the two. That's the truth, because when I'm creating music, I truly feel and define myself as an artist. It really comes from that place. I'm not thinking about signals and frequencies.
You probably wouldn't be that good an artist if you did.
Yeah, and it would be horrible if that happened, I think. Um, so music for me personally is a very personal thing, where I really feel the connection as an artist. But obviously it helps in my job, which is a music tech company, right? Working on music related products. So I think from a technical perspective, it helps in certain contexts. Um, but I think where it helps the most is in my role. I'm not just solving technical problems. My role is more like an innovation role, and I need to think in terms of you know business strategy and map that out to product strategy, how you deliver on that value, and from there go back to the technology that we need to build to unlock certain mechanics that you know enable that value upstream. So I think where I've leveraged maybe in a musician the most is by being able to relate to some of the problems that other people making music have, right? And so yeah, I think it's helped a lot in that. But obviously, it's still a guilty pleasure to show up every day at work and know that everyone else is a musician. That we have discounts at certain stores that I can buy more guitars from and stuff like that. So it's been a beautiful way to where my two main passions have converged, even though I didn't intend them to.
Yeah. Well, I just think that that's so cool. Is as a company, there's so many musicians. I guess technically at my company, there's only 6 of us, but everyone plays golf, so maybe that's
Okay.
that's a thing where it's like, well, we work in that
Sports
industry.
analytics,
Yeah,
man.
exactly. Like we have to if our biggest clients are in golf. So maybe that's something we should normalize more of. It's interesting. There's this big movement for. I'm not sure if you saw. I don't even know if this is really super kosher to talk about, but um, there's a letter from the guy who started Basecamp. And the idea is that they're really pushing away from everything, um, like you do what you do at home, but don't bring it to work type of thing. And to me, that's a really, especially like think about the work you're doing. Like if you're not bringing your passion for music, how are you gonna convey and understand your customers or those types of things? And I think it can be very effectively done to bring what you're doing at home or the things that you care about into your job. That probably makes you a better employee, especially if it's really in line with the company. So
Oh, I totally agree. And no, I think that sometimes the concern is, oh, don't mix home and work. But I think um, it can come from a different place, which is you care. I mean, you really relate to the value that you're creating because you can benefit from that value yourself, right?
yeah,
And I think that makes your daily work a lot different with a lot of added purpose versus, I don't know, I'm not that I have a problem with that, but
of course, of course.
there's a lot of software engineers out there that they just want to write software, and that's fine, and that could be a passion on its own, but they don't necessarily connect to the value that that software is creating, right?
Yeah, that's weird. This might sound a little cliche, but I've always sort of looked at that extra interest in what I was working on as sort of a superpower. It's that tank you can tap into if you're. It's like, oh, I'm not that motivated to do this today. It's like, well, I got to work on something that I really care about, and that's always that fun little extra push. Talking about pushing yourself, I'd love to hear this music MTV story that you have. I've only heard the fringe of it, so I want the whole story and uh, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, so back in Argentina, yeah, as I said, I started with music when I was like 19 or 20. And eventually I formed a band with one of my very best friends, Diego. And yeah, we started by doing what most bands do, start covering other bands and started playing live in the local scene. And eventually I wanted to start writing my own stuff. And it also had to do with, a very hard chapter. Back in 2008, my mom fell sick, and it was a very, very tough time in my life. And I found that music, was one of those things that kept me going, really. And it was a catalyst to writing my first studio albums, like 10 or 12 songs under my band's name. And yeah, we decided to go and record into a studio, and I put a lot of love and effort into that because it's not just something that I wanted to do; it's something that I needed to do. I had to because that was the way that I was able to deal with a very difficult situation. And yeah, and once we have that original material and I write in English, not many bands in Argentina write their own material in foreign language. Um, Eventually, we started getting some good attention, a lot of local radio airplay. And one day, just the way I am, just go for it. I was like, we're gonna shoot a music video, and we're gonna do something with it. So I even wrote the script of the music video and the story, and we hired an agency and we hired actors, and it was super fun to do. The song is called "It's a Wild Ride." It's an acoustic, just guitar, cello, and piano.
I'll link it if I can find it below.
And and I wrote the whole thing, including all the instrumentation. And yeah, we shot the music video, and I said, I wanna get it to MTV. That was literally the goal. And yeah, kind of crazy, right? Because that's, I mean, something that you can get done that easily. But we started sending copies of the CD and the DVD with the music video, and press and all that, and started literally calling on the phone to the headquarters in Buenos Aires. And I think it was like 6 months that no one cared, until our CD got into the hands of an A&R at MTV, Mauricio Zapata, good friend of mine now, and I think he was one of those the last man standing that was at MTV for the right reasons, which was discover good music and promote it and support the local communities, because at the time MTV had become a lot of like the reality show.
Yeah.
But one day, literally, we got an email from MTV saying, "We love your video. Please send us a high-res version with this type of encoding, blah, 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 because we're going to start airing it in this new section." And I was like, insane. I couldn't believe it. So, yeah, eventually we figured out all the logistics, sent the video over, and it aired for a couple of months in a new segment. And that was incredible. Like, now I can say that I made it to MTV. That's more relevant than any data science. And then we actually shot a second music video for another one of my songs, and that video aired on VH1 Latin America, all the way from Mexico to Argentina. So it was amazing.
Chatting here with a celebrity.
No, we didn't get to that point. We got some local recognition, but I think it's one of those things that I suffered the most when moving to the U.S. Really, leaving the band or that project, even though we continue doing some stuff. Playing live with people that you like, it's such a beautiful thing. But yeah, and then actually the second studio album was I was already here in the U.S., so I would go back to Argentina, work with my band. We recorded the album in one of my short trips, and I came back to the U.S. and we released that one in 2015. So yeah, I mean, music has been a beautiful thing, and I continue making music now on my own as a producer. But after the pandemic is over, I realized that I really want to go back to playing live because it's such a wonderful feeling. So if you know any people looking for a band, I'm looking to.
I'm sure I can.
Do you play anything?
No, I don't. That was the
time to learn something.
I was like the one Asian kid that didn't play an instrument. No, I had a friend in college. His name is Seth Gilliard, and it always was like I was in awe of it. So he would play violin covers of my favorite songs. He'd listen to the song once and be able to just, and it like it broke my brain. I was like, that's the coolest thing ever. I want to learn to play the violin. He still has some stuff on YouTube. Maybe I'll link his channel below as well. But I've always appreciated music, but to the point that I appreciated how difficult it was. And so, admittedly, I think that I'm a big believer in trying to like maximize your capabilities, right? And I think music works a part of your brain that I've probably never worked before. And to me, I would love to explore that just to like essentially unlock that part of my brain. I think that for us to be the most effective humans or whatever it is that we're going to be, the more we experiment, the more like different experiences we have, that rounds us out, that makes us better able to empathize or to understand other experiences. And to me, I love that you went so far down that route. Maybe that route for me was like playing professional golf and trying to pursue that. And it's like, wow, I tried to compete at this highest level. I really like learned how to hone in and appreciate another craft that is completely different from what I do now. But every problem that I face in data science or every problem that I face in these other domains, it's weird. I feel like in some way I can relate it to my experience in golf, and I'm sure you have that as well. It's like, hey, this is in a weird way related to my experience playing live music or whatever that might be. I would imagine, us talking on a podcast like this probably has at least some weird feeling of doing something live in another form, right? So
the microphone. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm not one to really give life advice or life advice that's any good, but I think to anyone listening, like it pays to explore and have like really rich other life experiences, hobbies, whatever that might be, because at least in my experience, I've been able to leverage those things and use those feelings that I generated, whether it was success or failure, to become more effective or happy in other areas of my life.
I agree 100%, and I think we're only starting to really understand the mechanics of the brain, and I'm pretty convinced that learning or investing in completely different things creates some connections that can be leveraged on anything that you do. I truly believe that. In my case, and also, I mean, definitely with music, but also on my entrepreneurial journey, just product management, and even going back to my days as a graphic designer and leadership, and I feel like right now I'm exercising, I'm leveraging all that I've done to become more effective at what I do. And the second part of that is, I think it's a very healthy thing, especially, I don't know about you, but I'm on the obsessive side. I get deeply invested in what I do. at any point in time. So I'm really good at burning myself out. So if I don't have a way to context switch and do something completely different, I cannot operate. So I think some amount of context switching is actually very healthy and far from distracting you from becoming better at what you do. I think it makes you better at that thing, at the main thing that you do.
Yeah, I don't know if I've mentioned this before in a conversation, but that's almost exactly what I found with content creation versus my work versus physical activity is when I'm programming, when I'm thinking critically about those things, that the like brain muscles I use associated with that are very different from what I use when I'm producing content or when I'm having a conversation like this. Like the creative and the maybe it's slightly different critical thinking. And that's very different from what I use when I am like hiking or playing golf or doing yoga or doing these things outside. And so I found that I get tremendous, well, I can get a lot more done in the day because I'm doing three things that are in my mind they just feel very different from each other, and they're not, I'm not emptying each one of those tanks every time I go. I have, some like a little fuel reserve in each of these things, and I can dip into those. And I I think that it's different for everyone. Obviously,
Yeah.
someone might have a huge reserve for coding. I mean, just love it and not burn out after some time. But I found that if I spend time, like coding in the morning, and then I do content creation in the afternoon, that coding tank starts to kind of slowly refill as I deplete the content tank, and it's they're not necessarily directly correlated, which finding things that are not directly correlated in your life in terms of happiness and these types of things, I think is very powerful.
Yeah, and I think that there's been this. Things change very fast, and cultures change very fast, and I think the previous generation, I think, grew up with this idea of specialize, don't get distracted. You need to do one thing, and you need to do it very well, and you need to do better than anyone else to be competitive. And I think there's more and more evidence that T-shaped profiles are is a very good thing to build. And I see that in myself. Aside from the music or the design, just having that holistic view, the ability to zoom in and zoom out and work in a very specific technical problem, but then see it through the lenses of business strategy, product, uh, being able to switch between the strategic and the tactical and layer. I think it's invaluable, and I would encourage anyone, no matter what it is that you do, and no matter how technical that is, invest in other things because you will only gain, you know, better and better abilities to see problems through different perspectives. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting the talk of specialization. I think there's a way to look at specialization in a general light. This is going to sound kind of weird, but one of my favorite concepts is that if you want to differentiate yourself, like I will never be the best data scientist in terms of pure data science knowledge. But if I combine that with my interest in golf, right, I can be a pretty darn good data scientist in the golf domain. And then if I combine that with creating content around data science, let's say sports analytics to generalize, I would argue that I'm probably one of the most well known in that space across those three things. And so in a sense, I am general. I have a general interest across these three domains, but by combining them, I'm able to specialize and differentiate myself in a very powerful way. And I think people look at specialization as always niching down further and further into one area of expertise, but specialization can actually be like combining different areas that you're interested in. And I don't know what you'd exactly call that, but I think just that might hopefully be a paradigm shift for someone else like it was for me, is that like what we mean by specialization and making it effective might not be what how you define specialization.
Yeah.
And I think specialization in the way I described, like that's what you want. That's what makes you very effective. Um, but it also isn't really specialization.
No, and I think it also depends on on where you are operating and living. Um, coming from Argentina, I feel like I'm in Disneyland here, literally, because you, unlike other places here in the U.S., you, I think you have the luxury to choose exactly what you want to do and find that intersection of interest, and you will be able to make a living out of it. It's such a strong economy, and things operate at such a scale that is a place where that model works, and I think it works very well. But going back to Argentina, there's a reason why I left, because I couldn't find. I wanted to specialize. I want to work on signal processing, and I want to work with audio. I didn't know at the time about music, but audio and signal processing, and I couldn't find anything because it was too specific. And that reality, that context, really pushes people to make certain decisions. And back in Argentina, everyone became pretty much a software engineer, a generalist, because that's the kind of jobs that you can get, and you need to adapt. You cannot get picky. So I think it's there's a healthy balance of exploiting personal interest and seeing what works in the time and space that you're operating, right?
Well, I think that that's a very valid point. I think you're right. Temporally, the philosophy that I just described probably wouldn't have worked 12 years, maybe a little longer ago, like 15 years ago in the US. But as we continue to grow more towards a content driven society, or society where everything's a lot more available online, I think that there is, we're moving more towards that philosophy or that type of skill set and specialization becoming more relevant. I've found, for example, online, like the intersection of data science and content creation. If I was to go into a bar somewhere and try and find even just one of those people organically, quote unquote, it would be so overwhelmingly difficult, right? Like, what are the odds I find a data scientist? What are the odds I find the intersection of those two? But now, with essentially the power of the internet, with these communities that are being built, I can go in and I can find 20 people that have that same intersection of interest, and to me that blows my mind that that's accessible to us now. Again, that's not something that historically was accessible, but you're able to find people who have those same interests as you. You're able to find those people that can build things with you now at a rate that was unprecedented before.
Totally. No, that's a very important point, and just the access, like online courses. You can get world class content taught by world class professors for free, or almost for free. I think that's definitely gives the opportunity for people to commit to explore something with a much lower rate. Like, you don't have to enroll in a 2-year degree and spend $100,000. You can give it a try. You can. Right now, there's no excuse. It's like the best time ever for curious people, right? Like, at some point, I really want to get into bioinformatics, or like learn more about
I have a guide for you.
DNA sequencing and all that. And a few years ago, I just like forget it. I mean, or buy a book. But now you have, you can do an online course or specialization, and it's there for grab. There's no excuses.
Yeah, I love it. Well, so honestly, that's the majority of the questions I have. I've kind of one last thing that I'm kind of interested in, and that's your experience moving here temporarily to Hawaii, and now having to hang out with me every so often. So,
what can I say? It's been great. I think, towards the end of last year, I've been working remotely for a while. Splice has offices in New York and also LA, but we never got to see the new office in LA. And my girlfriend works at another tech company, currently remote as well. And yeah, we were like, why not? Let's just do it. Let's do it now. So we're based in Venice, California. And bought a one-way ticket, and here we are. We're heading back now in a couple of weeks, so I'm a little sad, but it's been beautiful. Ironically, because of the time difference, I think we ended up working more hours.
Is that your pitch to keep it going?
What's that?
That's your pitch to keep it going? The remote forever is, I work more,
Yeah. But yeah, we usually start very early, 6 or 7. Um, but sometimes it's like, oh, it's already 3, 4 p.m. and I'm still working. Or anyway, it's been great, and being able to combine, you know, doing what we love, and after work and on the weekends having, the beach and everything, and meeting cool people like yourself, and it's been great. I
So
think I'm gonna miss it, and
I will say before you leave, if you just walk around the beach with a guitar, people will just start yelling at you to play, so you can get your
oh,
fix for live
there's
music.
no,
Like no,
I
dead
brought a
serious.
guitar.
No, if you go to one of the beach parks and you just carry a guitar, they'll be like, "Oh, play something," and then you just start going.
Okay, I need to experience that before leaving.
Dead serious. Um, no, I love that. I guess one thing I forgot that I would like your input on. So we've talked so much about signal processing, audio in this conversation. For someone who's looking to learn more about that, what are good places to maybe explore that domain? I think you have some Medium articles on that topic at all.
Yeah,
I'll obviously share those below, but any other places I think that would be really valuable to anyone listening here.
sure. Yeah, so I mean, traditionally, audio has been given less attention than compared to the image domain for obvious reasons. But over time, there's been more and more things accessible. I think, there's a number of things, but uh, the first thing that I would say for someone who's already, you know, into data science and already, programming and all that, you can check a couple of libraries. One is called Librosa, one is called Essentia. And these are libraries that allow you to manipulate audio data very easily, and that could be a good starting point. Just start getting an intuition and kind of like go backwards, because signal processing is a hard discipline. If you want to go down to the math and everything, it's tough. It can be intimidating, a lot of equations and stuff. But I think what I would suggest is find a problem that you're interested in. Audio classification, something like that. You can read papers about it. Today, just any Google search, you're going to find a lot of material, and then start playing with some libraries. Start playing with addresses from a feature engineering aspect. Even if you don't train a machine learning model, get familiar with the ways you can transform or represent audio data. Get familiar with the Fourier transform. You don't need to implement it from scratch, but try to develop the intuition behind it. And again, that it can be intimidating if you go from a mathematical perspective, but the intuition, the idea that you can approximate any signal as a linear combination of complex exponential functions, that is a big thing. Even though today, I mean, currently there's a lot of work going on that works with audio in the time domain, not using the frequency domain. That's a good starting point. And I personally think that feature engineering is far from dead, and it will never be dead. And it's actually many times what makes you a good problem solver. So when someone asks me whether it's to get started in audio or anything, any kind of data, I always say try to solve problems without machine learning. Get familiar with how to manipulate the data that you're working with. And at the end of the day, feature engineering. Become really good at that. But back to your question, I mean, I think there's things that they can, this intersection of audio and music and machine learning, there's a lot going on in Europe, actually, more than in the US. There's a couple of universities, Queen Mary University, UPF in Barcelona, and there's just a big community of that. So I would also look into what's going on there at companies and academic institutions. But yeah, I think, and like we talked about it at the beginning, there's nothing like choosing one problem and try to solve it. But specifically with audio, I would say go explore those couple libraries, do like a top-bottom approach, find a feature that you have no idea what it is, see what it does to your input, and then maybe try to do some literature review to see what's going on under the hood. I think that's a good starting point. I'm also personally starting to write more and more about that intersection. I have a couple of articles called Audio AI that address specifically source separation, but there's a lot more that I've been working on.
All right, so make sure you go follow Ale on Medium. Medium's where you do most of your writing, right?
Yeah, and I promise I'm gonna be writing more.
So we're holding you accountable. So
Good. I have no choice now. Yeah, and finally, I think I would like to do a couple of remarks if we're going to give advice to people, whether it's
sure.
to get started with audio or in general. I think, there for those people that are trying to break into applied machine learning, the most important thing, going back to the earlier conversation, is decision making. Get comfortable with ambiguity, get comfortable with uncertainty, and become actionable, right? Actually, one of the articles that I wrote is about why most machine learning problems fail. And I think there's two elements that are the biggest contributors. One is the cost of iterating, and I make a case for many times when objectives are not well defined from a business perspective, and that happens every day. The difference is in traditional software engineering, you can iterate and pivot very inexpensively. If you need to make a change, it can take in the order of a couple of hours, right? So I think many companies that get away with writing software and they're constantly changing objectives or expanding scope, they can still ship something usable that works. When it comes to machine learning, something that could apparently be a small change can put you back into experimentation mode for a month or two. And when you're not clear what the objective is, you can get stuck into this chronic experimentation mode for a while, and that's considered a failure in many companies, right? And the second one that I wanted to say is the definition of readiness. I think no matter what problem you're working on, you should be able to answer the question, how good is good enough? To me, that's the most important question in applied data science and machine learning, because unlike in software where readiness is defined by given scope and performance requirements, in machine learning the path to this doesn't work to this work is a continuous function, and it's not very linear, right?
Yeah.
So when objectives are not clearly defined, I've seen many companies get stuck into what I call the accuracy rat wheel, and no one making the call, okay, this is good enough, now we can build a product that delivers value, and then go back to R&D. So that's what I wanted to say as the last remark. Whether it's you or you're part of the team, there needs to be a strong decision maker that's very comfortable with ambiguity and very comfortable making decisions. That's where I see most companies failing at. I see a lot of companies, they hire 10, 20 data scientists, let them do their thing. There needs to be a person, a decision maker, that's constantly mapping business objectives with the tactical layer and how a product is going to deliver on that back to the technology that will unlock that value. And how good is good enough should be a question that you ask on a daily basis.
Nice. So you're gonna make a song, How Good Is Good Enough?
Maybe.
There you go. Excellent, Ale. This was so much fun. I always enjoy chatting with you. I'm glad we could actually record this one. So.
Finally, yeah.
So perfect. Thank you again for coming in, and I'm just looking forward to next time.
All right. Thanks a lot for the invite.